My classic Shelby Mustang GT500, the one I'd owned since 1971, broke down on a deserted stretch of road. It was pitch black, a frigid night in late November. My phone was predictably dead. Then, a beat-up Ford Ranger pulled over. Out stepped a young woman, maybe 25, wearing a grease-stained white jacket with the blue logo. She carried an old-school, dented metal toolbox. She diagnosed the problem in seconds: a faulty ignition control module. Had me running 15 minutes later. She refused my money, $300 twice. She said she was already late for a catering shift at the most important party of the year. But her father taught her you don't drive past trouble. 20 minutes later, I walked into my own 74th birthday gala, which my children Leonard and Chloe were hosting at my estate. Before I could even greet a guest, I heard it, my children's voices, sharp and furious, coming from the service hallway. I went to see. It was her, the young woman who had just saved me, standing there, still smelling of motor oil and cold air. My children were tearing into her, calling her a liability, unprofessional, and firing her on the spot in front of the entire staff. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. They had no idea who she'd been helping. They had no idea who she was to me now. And they had absolutely no idea what I was about to do to them. Let me tell you how this really started. My name is Evelyn Shaw, and this is the story of how I found the right person to inherit the company I built from nothing. Now back to the road. I was driving to my own party that Tuesday evening. 74 years old, and still operating the GT500. Leonard had sent me half a dozen articles about switching to a modern, autonomous vehicle, a Tesla, a new Range Rover, something that wouldn't require constant mechanical intervention. I deleted them all. I bought the Shelby in 1971 with the first substantial check I earned from Zenith Global Dynamics. We had just secured our first major contract manufacturing specialized components for regional airlines. The car was expensive, too much for my small garage operation, but I wanted something that was built to last, something I could understand and fix. The drive to my property in upstate New York is long, winding, and completely unlit. Just the headlights cutting through the dense forest. I designed and built my life here, the company 30 years ago, the house 10 years after that. Leonard and Chloe grew up with every advantage I never had. They never had to build anything. The engine hesitated first. A brief, unsettling stutter I felt not just in the wheel, but in my gut. A mechanical engineer for 5 decades, and that feeling never leaves you. I pulled over just as the engine sputtered and died completely. Silence. Just the wind through the pines. I knew it instantly, the ignition control module. A known failure point in these older high-performance engines. You can try to jump it or bypass the primary circuit, but you need very specific tools and a clean piece of wire. I popped the hood, grabbed the pathetic, decade-old flashlight from the trunk, a dusty item Chloe had once scoffed at, calling it archaic. My phone was, of course, a paperweight. I'd forgotten to charge it. 74 and still forgetting the basics. I stood there shivering 6 miles from home. Walking in my designer heels was a non-starter. I stood there in the cold, shining the flashlight fruitlessly into the engine bay, running through my limited options. Flagging down a car here was always a risk. Only neighbors used this road, and they were usually already at my party. Then I saw headlights reflecting off the trees behind me. An old, boxy Ford Ranger, probably 20 years old, rattling as it slowed. It pulled onto the narrow shoulder, maybe 50 feet back. I stayed by the hood, making sure I looked like an older woman in distress, not a threat. The driver's side door opened with a noisy squeak, and out stepped a young woman. Mid-20s. She wore a catering uniform. Black slacks, a crisp white jacket with the faded blue logo of Premier Provisions, and her dark hair was tightly pulled back. She moved with a clear, determined economy. "Need help, ma'am?" she called out, her voice strong despite the chill. "Car died," I said. "I know the issue, ignition control module, but I'm missing the right tools. And my phone is dead." She approached the Mustang and looked under the hood. She didn't just glance. Her gaze was instantly focused, bypassing the visible components and going straight to the core electronics. Not the polite, vague look most people give. ICM, she confirmed, nodding once. Classic failure point. I have tools. Let me see. She went back to her truck and returned with a heavy, well-used metal toolbox, the kind that shows honest wear, not cosmetic aging. It was organized. Sockets, wrenches, electrical components, various gauges, and a spool of insulated copper wire. This was the kit of someone who earned their living with their hands. She set it down and got straight to work. There were no wasted movements, no hesitation. She located the module, checked the wiring, and quickly fabricated a bypass using a short piece of wire and some specialized tape, temporarily routing around the fault. I held the flashlight, watching her hands steady, quick, and competent. The entire repair took less than 17 minutes. Try it now, she instructed. I got in, turned the key, and the powerful GT500 engine roared to life. Rough initially, then smoothing out into a low, familiar rumble. I shut it off and got out. She was already packing up her toolbox. You certainly know your way around an engine, I stated. My father taught me, she said, wiping her hands on a rag. He was a mechanic. Used to own a small performance shop. The use of was told me a silent story, the kind you learn to recognize when you've been through enough life. Well, you saved me tonight, I said. I pulled out my wallet and retrieved 3 $100 bills. Please let me pay you for your time. She firmly shook her head. No, ma'am. I can't. You should, I insisted, pushing the money toward her. You are clearly professional. That was worth far more than $300. My father taught me you help because it's the right thing to do, not for payment, she repeated, avoiding eye contact with the money. I already have a job. I was just raised not to leave someone stranded on a road like this. There was that principle again, something increasingly rare in the world I often navigated. The world of quarterly reports and market expediency. I kept the money extended. At least take something for being late. You stopped when you didn't have to. She looked at the bills, then at me, the struggle visible in her tired eyes. Thank you, but no. I'm glad I could help. $300 for 17 minutes of work. Most people would have snatched it up without a thought. She didn't even waver. Where are you headed tonight? I asked, putting the money back. Catering job, she said, zipping her jacket. The Shaw estate, actually. Your party, I think. She glanced at her wrist, a tiny flash of worry crossing her face. I'm already 25 minutes late. They'll probably be furious. I really need this job. The Shaw estate. My house. My 74th birthday gala. How late will you be getting there? I asked, already knowing the answer. By the time I get through the gate and find parking? 40 minutes, maybe. She picked up the heavy toolbox. But I couldn't just drive past you. Thank you again, I called out as she started walking back to her rattling truck. She turned, gave me a small, genuine smile and said, Drive safe. I got back into the GT500, watched her taillights vanish around the bend, and then followed her toward the life I had built. The estate gates were open when I arrived, the circular drive lined with luxury vehicles. Leonard had hired an entire squad of valets, which felt theatrical for the 60 or so guests. But my son lived by the principle of performative wealth. Everything had to look perfect. I parked my vintage Mustang myself, waved off a valet, and entered through the main doors. The house was blazing with light, the air filled with the quiet murmur of high-net-worth small talk and the precise chords of a hired string quartet. Caterers, all immaculate in their uniforms, circulated with trays. Leonard and Chloe stood near the entrance, both immaculate. Leonard in a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, Chloe in a cream silk gown. They were playing the consummate hosts, greeting investors and associates with the practiced, flawless smiles they'd learned at expensive business schools. Chloe spotted me and strode over immediately, a flicker of concern replacing her performance smile. Mother, there you are. We were worried. You were running so late. Car trouble, I said simply. Someone helped me. Oh good. Well, quickly, come meet the Davidsons. They're heavily invested in the new aerospace division. Always be networking, Mother. I smiled the required smiles, shook hands with people whose quarterly projections were more interesting than their conversation, and accepted a flute of champagne I had no intention of drinking. I set the glass down on a nearby mahogany table and surveyed the room. All these people, in their $7,000 dresses and custom watches, discussing market futures and European vacations. Not a single person in this room, I thought with absolute certainty, would have stopped for a stranded stranger on that dark road tonight. They would have hit the accelerator. A few minutes after my arrival, a high cutting sound sliced through the polite noise of the string quartet. It was Chloe's voice, sharp and laced with cold fury, coming from the back corridor near the kitchen. The guests nearest me didn't flinch, they were too busy debating the next Federal Reserve meeting, but I noticed. I always notice when my children used that tone. It was the tone of superiority mixed with entitlement. I excused myself and followed the sound. The service hallway, meant for staff transit, was usually invisible to guests. Chloe stood squarely in the middle, arms tightly crossed. Leonard was beside her, holding his phone, ready to document the transgression, his face a mask of smug disapproval. And facing them, under the harsh overhead fluorescent light, was the young woman from the road, Kira Vance. She looked different now. Her white catering jacket had a fresh, dark smear of grease across the front, and her meticulously pinned hair had slipped loose around her face. She stood absolutely still while my daughter launched her attack. "This is completely unacceptable and frankly, insulting." Chloe's voice echoed down the corridor. "You show up 40 minutes late looking like you were dragged out of a grease pit. This is a 5-star event, not a salvage yard." The head of the catering team, a nervous man in a pristine white chef's coat, hovered nearby. "I sincerely apologize, Miss Shaw. This has never happened with our staff before." "It shouldn't happen ever," Leonard chimed in, stepping forward. "We cannot have unreliable people representing our events, especially an event for Mother. It reflects poorly on us." Kira tried to speak. "There was someone stranded on the road dash." "I don't want to hear your excuses." Chloe cut her off with a wave of her hand, dismissing her as a nuisance. "You made a professional commitment to this job, to my mother's party. You're fired. Collect your belongings and leave the premises immediately." Other catering staff had stopped to watch, some looking relieved it wasn't them, others simply embarrassed for the young woman. Kira didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply gave one quiet nod. "I understand." That was the moment I stepped fully into the hallway. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked, my voice calm but carrying the weight of the company founder. Chloe spun around, her face momentarily losing its composure. "Mother, we are handling a minor staffing issue. This caterer showed up completely unpresentable, nearly an hour late. There was someone stranded on the access road," Kira repeated, her voice steady and respectful despite the humiliation. "I had to stop and help." "That's no defense," Chloe insisted, her entitlement flaring. "This job was your priority." I looked at the young woman. She met my eyes. The flicker of recognition, the older woman with the Mustang flashed across her tired face. "The person she helped," I stated clearly, letting the words fill the sudden silence, "was me." The hallway went completely silent. Even the distant sound of the string quartet seemed to dim. Chloe blinked. "What?" "My car, the Shelby, died on the access road. She stopped and fixed it. That is why she is late. That is why there is grease on her jacket." Leonard slowly lowered his phone. Chloe's perfect mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The head caterer looked like he might faint. "She fixed your car?" Leonard finally managed. "Ignition control module bypass. Diagnosed it in 10 seconds and had me running in 17 minutes. Knew exactly what she was doing. I offered to pay her $300 twice. She refused both times." Chloe's expression shifted, the anger draining away, replaced by pure, uncomfortable realization. "We didn't know." "Of course you didn't," I said, a slow, deep disappointment coloring my voice. "You were too busy firing her to ask." Leonard put his phone away and tried to salvage the situation. "Well, if she was helping you, Mother, that's entirely different." "Is it?" I challenged, fixing him with a stare. "Or is it only different because it was me? Would you have fired her if she had stopped to help a complete stranger? A neighbor you didn't know?" He had no answer for that. I turned to the head caterer. "She stays. In fact, I'd like her to serve specifically in the library tonight. I will be spending most of my time there." The caterer nodded frantically. "Of course, Mrs. Shaw." Whatever you wish. Chloe reached out to touch my arm. Mother, maybe we should discuss this privately. There is nothing to discuss. She stays. I looked at Kira again. When the party winds down, come find me in the library. I'd like to talk to you. Yes, ma'am, she replied, a faint relief washing over her face. Leonard and Chloe exchanged a deeply resentful look, but knew the battle was lost. They retreated to the main rooms, their perfect composure slightly shattered. I stayed a moment longer. Kira was washing the grease off her hands at a service sink. Thank you, she said, quiet, strained. You saved me tonight. It seemed only fair to return the favor. She dried her hands and smoothed down her uniform, the grease stain still visible. I should get back to work. I nodded and watched her walk away, straight-backed and composed. The lesson had begun. The party lasted another 2 hours. I moved among the guests, making polite conversation, pretending I cared about the intricacies of the next acquisition and the latest fluctuations in bond markets. All the while, my mind was fixated on the scene in the hallway. My children, Leonard and Chloe, had tried to humiliate and dismiss someone for being late. They didn't know the person she helped was their mother, but that was secondary. The primary horrifying truth was that they wouldn't have cared either way. Their immediate gut reaction was to punish and preserve the image of perfection, not to investigate the reality of the situation. They valued expediency over character. Around 10 o'clock, the last of the guests filtered out. Leonard and Chloe stayed, seeing everyone off with strained smiles. The catering staff began the systematic, quiet process of breaking down the elaborate setup. I retreated to the library, the only room in the entire estate I genuinely loved. It smelled of old leather, paper, and the sharp scent of smoke from the fieldstone fireplace. 15 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the open door frame. Kira Vance stood there. She had managed to clean her face and hands thoroughly, and her hair was tied back again, but she still looked utterly exhausted. Come in, Kira, I said, gesturing to the deep leather chair across from mine. Sit down. She hesitated briefly, then sat, her posture unnaturally straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. What is your name again? I asked. Kira Vance. How old are you, Kira? 25, she replied. 25. The exact age I was when I founded Zenith Global Dynamics in a rented garage space. The age I was when countless people, my professors, my male competitors, even my own mother told me I was aiming too high, that I would certainly fail. You mentioned you needed this job badly, I said, leaning forward slightly. Why? She took a steadying breath. My father is very ill. He has advanced pancreatic cancer. He can no longer work his mechanic shop, and the medical bills, they are monumental. I work catering jobs plus 2 others to cover what the insurance doesn't. And your mother? She passed away when I was 9. A collision involving a commercial truck. My father raised me alone. 9 years old, and she lost her anchor. Then she grew up with a father who taught her how to fix high-performance engines instead of how to ask for handouts. Your father taught you about cars, I mused. He was a mechanic. Her voice softened immediately. He was the best. He taught me everything. And he's the reason I stopped tonight. He always said, you help people because it is the right thing to do, not because you will get something out of it. Principles are more valuable than profit. That is a profound lesson, Kira. One that cost you a job tonight. It has cost me more than one job, she admitted quietly. I realize the world doesn't reward people for having principles anymore. It rewards them for being quick, expedient, and compliant. Before catering and the other jobs, I pressed, what were you doing? She looked down at her hands again. I was in school. Mechanical engineering. Junior year at Penn State. Engineering. Of course. Why did you leave? Dad was diagnosed 2 years ago. I had to choose. Someone had to take care of him, manage the home, and pay the bills. I was only 1 year away from graduating, but you do what you have to do. 1 year away from completing her degree. She had been that close to securing a future for herself. I sat back, absorbing the facts. This young woman who stopped on a dark, desolate road, who refused $300 twice, who sacrificed her entire education to care for her dying father, and who endured humiliation tonight without a word of self-pity, was the embodiment of everything I had built my company on: character, competence, and grit. "I am going to offer you something, Kira," I stated, my voice low and serious, "and I want you to think about it, truly think about it, before you answer." She waited, completely still. "I need a personal assistant. Someone who understands how things actually work, not just how they look. Someone who is intelligent enough to challenge me, and honest enough not to tell me what I want to hear." I leaned forward once more, meeting her gaze. "The job pays a very real executive-level salary. Full benefits, including comprehensive health insurance that will cover your father's treatments and care with zero deductible. And Zenith Global Dynamics will pay for you to finish your degree. 1 year of night classes while you work during the day." Her eyes grew wide, searching my face for the catch, the fine print. "Mrs. Shaw," she whispered, "I don't understand. This is too much. It is not charity, Kira. I will expect you to work, truly work, harder than you have ever worked before. But if you are willing to do that, if you are willing to learn the inner workings of a multi-billion-dollar corporation from the ground up, the job is yours." "Why me?" she asked finally, the first question of pure self-doubt. "Because I was you," I said. 49 years ago, I was 23 years old with nothing but a garage and an idea. People told me I would fail. Some people actively wanted me to fail. But I worked harder and I figured things out. Tonight you chose helping a stranger over protecting your job, your income, and your time. That tells me everything I need to know about your character and competence." Kira looked like she might shatter. She simply nodded once. "Say yes or say no," I commanded gently. "But decide tonight. I want you to start Monday if you accept." She took a deep, shaky breath, held it, and then let it out. "Yes, I will do it. Thank you." "Good. Be at the Zenith Global Dynamics headquarters office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. We will start the paperwork." She stood up. "I promise, Mrs. Shaw, I will not let you down." "I know you won't." I listened as her footsteps faded down the long hall, then heard the front door open and close. I sat back down and looked into the fading fire. I had built Zenith Global Dynamics from nothing. I knew the difference between a golden facade and a solid foundation. Leonard and Chloe grew up with money already in the bank. They never had to fight for anything. They only knew how to inherit. But I thought I had just found the one person who truly understood what it meant to build. Kira showed up Monday morning at 8:37, 13 minutes early. She wore plain black slacks and a tailored white button-down shirt, nothing flashy, but professional and clean. Her dark hair was pulled back exactly as it had been that night on the road. I met her in the lobby myself. "Good morning, Kira." "Good morning, Mrs. Shaw." She carried a slender canvas messenger bag over her shoulder. I took her up to the 23rd floor, where my executive suite was located. Zenith Global Dynamics occupied a sleek, 30-story building just outside Hartford, Connecticut, 3 floors dedicated to engineering, 6 to specialized component manufacturing coordination, and the rest for sales and administration. It was the kind of place where, if you walked past the testing lab, you could still catch the faint industrial smell of precision machine oil and fresh-cut alloy. I liked that smell. It meant people were actually making things. "Your desk is here," I said, pointing to the dedicated space just outside the triple-paned glass wall of my private office. "You will handle my calendar, correspondence, initial research, and scheduling. But more importantly, I am also going to give you projects, real operational work. I want to see how you think and how you execute." "Understood," she said, setting her bag down carefully. "This morning we will finalize your paperwork. Health insurance, direct deposit, non-disclosure agreements, and education funding. You can add your father to the top-tier health plan today." Her eyes grew bright for a fraction of a second, the relief so intense it was almost painful to witness, but she blinked it back immediately. "Thank you, Mrs. Shaw." "Don't thank me yet," I warned, a faint smile touching my lips. "You haven't seen the workload." But I knew she could handle it. I had known it since she refused the money. The first few weeks were standard executive assistant work. Managing complex calendars that span 4 continents, fielding high-level phone calls, and organizing digital files that should have been organized years ago. Kira approached it all with the same quiet competence she applied to engine repair. She was early every day, stayed late most nights, then headed straight to her engineering classes at the local university. About a month into her employment, I gave her the first real test. "Kira," I said one Friday afternoon, "our main assembly line for the A500 series, the specialized sensor components, is running significantly slower than it should be. The production managers keep citing minor scheduling friction, but the numbers don't lie. Figure out what's causing the slowdown. You have 2 weeks." She didn't go to the production directors or the VP of manufacturing. She went straight to the floor, donning the safety gear. She talked to the line workers, the people actually running the sophisticated robotic arms. She watched 3 full 8-hour shifts, taking meticulous notes by hand. She returned to my office after 12 days, not 14, with a concise 3-page analysis. "Mrs. Shaw," she began, projecting a simple data visualization. "The issue is the programmable logic controller. It is integrating the secondary material feed component exactly 0.65 seconds too slow on every third unit. A small gap, but it costs us 32 total units per shift. The solution? A 1-line code adjustment in the PLC, and a 20-foot rerouting of the pneumatic line to reduce lag. The fixed cost is about $4,000. The efficiency increase will save us nearly $400,000 in annualized labor and yield costs." I approved the fix immediately. Character and competence. Leonard heard about it at the next family dinner. He was already bristling, upset that I was taking Kira's classes out of the company education fund. "Mother," he stated over the risotto, his voice full of patronizing concern, "are you really letting your personal assistant make 6-figure production decisions? She's an administrative hire. I am letting an engineer solve engineering problems," I countered, resting my fork. "She's not an engineer. She dropped out. She's catering staff. She is in school, and she just saved us $400,000 this year. What did your finance division save us this quarter, Leonard?" Chloe quickly changed the subject, realizing Leonard was losing ground. But the seed of resentment had been planted. They saw Kira not as a person, but as a misplaced piece of low-status furniture their mother insisted on elevating. 6 months later, Kira's father died. She called me on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion, the deep, hollow echo of grief underneath. "My father passed last night, Mrs. Shaw. I need a few days off." "Take a week, Kira," I said immediately. "Take 2 if you need them. And use that time. He is covered. You focus on what you need to do." "Thank you." The funeral was that Friday. A small service at a quiet parish church in New Haven. I drove down myself and sat in the back row. I didn't want to intrude on her private sorrow. There were maybe 50 people there, working people, families from Daniel Vance's neighborhood, people he had kept driving. Kira sat in the front, surrounded by distant relatives. She didn't cry during the service. She sat very straight, listening to the pastor talk about her father's integrity, his skill, and how he had helped half the town keep their aging vehicles running. How he had taught his daughter everything he knew. After the service, people filed out toward the cemetery plot. I stayed back by my car. That was private family time. Kira emerged about an hour later, alone. The relatives had gone. She saw me standing there and stopped. "You came," she said quietly. "I did." She walked toward me slowly, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You're not alone in this world anymore, Kira," I told her, the words simply coming out. She looked at me for a long moment, the controlled composure finally failing. Her face crumpled and she started crying. Not loudly, just the quiet, broken sounds of deep, private grief. I put my arms around her, the 74-year-old CEO, and the grieving 25-year-old assistant, right there in the church parking lot. I let her cry until the strength returned. When she pulled back, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry. I just keep thinking he taught me everything. How to fix things, how to be honest, how to work hard. And I don't know if I did enough for him." "You stopped on a dark road to help a stranger even though it cost you a job, Kira," I said, holding her gaze. "That is exactly what he taught you. That is more than enough." She nodded, took a steadying breath, and gathered herself. "I should get back. Thank you, Mrs. Shaw. Take care of yourself, Kira." I watched her walk to her old Ford Ranger and drive away. I stood there, thinking about my own mother, how I was 25 when she died, and how I'd felt that same terrible, untethered emptiness. Kira came back to work the following Monday. She didn't talk about her father, but I noticed she started arriving even earlier, staying even later, throwing herself into her work and her studies like it was the only thing holding her together. Maybe it was. By the end of the first year, Kira had finished her remaining engineering coursework. Her graduation ceremony was held on a damp Saturday in May. I bought a ticket and sat in the crowd, watching her walk across the stage and accept her degree, a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. She found me in the crowd afterward, still in her cap and gown, sporting the biggest, most genuine smile I had seen from her since that night on the road. "You came," she said, slightly breathless. "Of course I came." She hugged me quickly, spontaneously, then pulled back, looking a little embarrassed. This feels impossible." "You earned it, Kira, because you made it possible. I gave you a chance. You did the work." I promoted her the following week, Special Projects Coordinator. A small raise, a significant increase in responsibility. She started managing cross-department initiatives that required a sharp engineering eye and someone who could talk to the people on the floor without talking down to them. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after her promotion, she called and asked if she could come by the estate. She wanted to check something on the Mustang. She showed up with her father's metal toolbox, the same one from that frigid night. We spent the afternoon in my garage working on the old GT500, oil change, checking the specialized wiring, replacing spark plugs. She worked with quiet confidence, and I helped, handing her wrenches and making minor adjustments. At one point she straightened up, wiping a streak of oil off her forehead. "Why did you really choose me, Mrs. Shaw?" I set down the wrench I was holding. "What do you mean?" "That night. You could have hired anyone. You could have called a tow truck after I left. Why me for the assistant job? Character, competence, and willingness to do what is right, even when it costs you. You demonstrated all of that in 17 minutes on a dark road." She thought about that for a moment. "My father used to say the same thing. He said you can teach anyone to fix a car, but you cannot teach them to care about doing it right." Your father was absolutely right. We finished the work, cleaned up, and she loaded the heavy toolbox back into the Ranger. Inside, as I washed the grease from my own hands, I thought again of Leonard and Chloe. They had grown up with every conceivable advantage. They'd never had to work on a machine, never understood the satisfaction of fixing something themselves. Maybe I realized my greatest failure was protecting them too much. By the end of the second year, Kira had saved Zenith Global Dynamics $1.5 million by renegotiating a single supplier contract. She used engineering analysis to demonstrate we were paying 25% more than the current market rate for high-grade titanium alloys. She found a better supplier with better terms and guaranteed quality. Chloe cornered me after a quarterly planning meeting. "People are talking about her mother." "Good things, I hope. They are saying you are grooming her for something substantial. She's only been here 2 years. That's nothing. Then she has accomplished more in 2 years than most people do in 10, I replied firmly. Chloe's jaw tightened, but she walked away without arguing. Leonard was more subtle. He started asking board members pointed, seemingly benign questions about Kira's background, her lack of a pedigree, and whether I was truly comfortable with her youthful inexperience. I shut him down every time. In year 3, I promoted Kira to Director of Operational Strategy. She now led a team of 7 engineers and production specialists. She ran them impeccably, listened to their ideas, and made complex decisions based solely on verifiable data, never on ego. When a major client, Falcon Aerospace, started signaling they might switch to a competitor contract worth $15 million annually, I sent Kira to meet with them. Alone. Sink or swim. She figured out the problem in a single 3-hour meeting. The client's technical team had critical engineering questions that our dedicated sales executives, with their marketing degrees, simply couldn't answer. Kira sat down, solved 3 months of technical confusion on a whiteboard, and the client stayed. $15 million, locked in for another 4 years. I introduced her to the board as invaluable to our current and future operations. Leonard and Chloe were both present at that board meeting. I watched their faces. The resentment they felt had begun to crystallize into something hard, something truly ugly: fear. By the end of year 4, Kira was effectively running the entire operations department, with nearly 50 people reporting to her. She handled the vast scope better than any executive I had observed with twice her experience. It was time to force the issue. I made an announcement at the next board meeting. Zenith Global Dynamics will be creating a new position, Chief Operating Officer, COO. This will be the second in command, reporting directly to me, with a clear line of succession. The room grew very quiet. 3 internal candidates will be considered over the next 9 months: Leonard, Chloe, and Kira Vance. When I said Kira's name, the silence was deafening. After the meeting, I saw Leonard and Chloe talking in the hallway. Low voices, heads together. They stopped when they saw me approach, instantly plastering on false smiles. "Mother," Chloe said smoothly, "good meeting. We should discuss the COO timeline. We need to get a clear advantage, of course." They walked away side by side. I watched them go. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice a shift. They were often in Leonard's finance office with the door closed. They started having lunch together, a rarity before this. Hushed phone calls abruptly ended when I walked past. I didn't say a word. I just watched and I waited. The real test of character was about to begin. About 2 months after the COO candidates were announced, Kira came to me with a growing concern. She was leading a massive client retention project trying to keep Apex Manufacturing, a key supplier of high-end flight control surfaces, from switching to our largest competitor. The contract was valued at $18 million annually. "How is the Apex project moving?" I asked. "Technically, we're stable," Kira reported. "The Apex technical team loves our proposal for optimizing their component tolerances. They are ready to sign the implementation plan. But I've been waiting for budget approval from finance for 3 weeks." "Leonard's department," I noted. "Yes. He initially said he'd have it to me by the end of the first week. Then he said there were complications in the financial modeling and required more documentation. I provided everything he asked for: full 20-page breakdown, risk assessment, and projected returns." She waited. Still no approval. For weeks passed. The client, Apex Manufacturing, started getting audibly nervous. Kira, resourceful as always, worked around the delay, keeping the client engaged with supplementary technical support. But without the official budget sign-off, she couldn't finalize the $18 million deal. I ran into Howard Pierce, one of our longest-serving board members, at an industry dinner. We were both standing by the coffee station. "Evelyn," he said, adjusting his tie, "can I ask you something confidential about Miss Vance?" "Of course, Howard." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Is she truly ready for COO? I'm hearing some concerns about her experience level. Specifically, her tendency to run projects over budget and miss critical deadlines." "What concerns precisely?" "Just that she's only been with us 4 years. That's very fast for a COO role." Chloe mentioned that Miss Vance might be in over her head with the Apex deal. And Leonard showed me some internal timelines that reflected unnecessary delays in her department. I smiled faintly. "Thank you for bringing this directly to me, Howard. I will look into it immediately." He nodded and walked away, satisfied he had done his due diligence. I returned to the office and checked the board minutes and internal communication logs. 3 other board members had been approached by either Leonard or Chloe in the past month. Same questions, same concerns, all carefully worded, all technically reasonable. Is she competent? Is she stable? Is she ready? The campaign was coordinated and utterly malicious. I went to Leonard's office the next afternoon. He was at his expansive mahogany desk, surrounded by reports. "How is everything in finance, Leonard?" "Running smoothly, Mother. No issues at all." "Good. How about Kira's budget request? The Apex retention project." "Oh, that. Yes, I'm reviewing it. Should have it approved soon." I glanced at his desk. I could clearly see the thick request folder, stamped with Kira's department name, sitting right on the top. It had been sitting there for 5 weeks. "Great," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Apex is getting anxious. It would be prudent to move quickly." "Absolutely," he replied, giving me his practiced, confident smile. 2 weeks later, the inevitable happened. Apex Manufacturing pulled out. They chose the competitor, citing a lack of timely commitment to implementation. From Zenith Global Dynamics. $18 million gone. Kira came to my office looking utterly devastated. She stood ramrod straight, but her face was pale, betraying her internal distress. I lost the account, Mrs. Shaw. Tell me exactly what happened, I instructed. She walked through every step she had taken, every negotiation point, every roadblock she had hit. The budget delays she emphasized killed the timeline. I should have pushed harder, she whispered, her hands clenched. I should have found a way around him. You did everything you could, Kira, I assured her. It doesn't feel like enough. She left my office defeated. At the next board meeting, Chloe presented the quarterly results. She ran through the numbers efficiently, then arrived at the operations division. Unfortunately, we lost the Apex manufacturing account, she announced, looking directly at Kira. $18 million annually. The operations team, despite significant effort, was unable to close the deal. Kira kept her face neutral, but I saw the flash of pain and shame. Perhaps, Chloe added casually, like she was simply observing the weather, the readiness concerns were valid after all. Several board members nodded. I watched Kira sit still, absorbing the public professional failure my children had meticulously engineered. A week later, HR came to me with a new development. A batch of 4 anonymous complaints about Kira, all filed within 48 hours of each other. They complained about her leadership style. Too demanding, lacking collaboration, creating tension, arrogant. I read them carefully. The language was almost identical in all 4, same phrasing, same structure. Have you verified these or their sources? I asked the HR director. We are required to investigate all complaints, Mrs. Shaw, regardless of source anonymity. Standard protocol. Of course. Keep me updated. I knew precisely who had written them. The game was over. The truth of their character was fully exposed. I picked up my phone and called my administrative assistant. Schedule an emergency board meeting for next Tuesday morning. Full attendance required. What is the agenda, Mrs. Shaw? The COO decision, I said. It is time to make the announcement. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I arrived early, setting up my materials in the conference room. A thick leather folder, several printouts, and my detailed handwritten notes. The week prior, HR, following standard protocol due to the accumulation of anonymous complaints, had placed Kira on administrative leave pending investigation. She was not allowed access to her work files. She couldn't defend herself. She just had to wait. She arrived at 9:43 looking drawn and weary. Dark circles underlined her eyes. She sat at the very end of the long mahogany table, away from the other chairs, already looking separated from the company. I didn't approach her or offer reassurance. I wanted the board and my children to operate under the assumption that I, too, was waiting for information. The 8 board members filtered in. Leonard and Chloe arrived last, together, dressed flawlessly, Chloe in a sharp gray suit, Leonard in a dark charcoal ensemble. They carried a laptop and a presentation remote. They had prepared. Good morning, everyone. I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. Thank you for making time on short notice. We are here to finalize the COO position and address the recent concerns raised about Kira Vance's performance. Leonard and Chloe have requested time to present their findings, I continued. We will hear from them first. Chloe stood up, clicked the remote, and the screen behind her lit up. The title slide was harsh and corporate, Critical Leadership Assessment. VP Operations Performance Review. Thank you, Mother, Chloe said, professional and cold. We bring these concerns forward with respect for Kira's efforts, but we have a responsibility to Zenith Global Dynamics. She clicked to the next slide, a timeline of Kira's projects over the past year. Several marked damningly in red. As you can see, there have been multiple failures and significant delays. The Apex manufacturing account $18 million lost annually, the supplier transition that ran over budget, and recurrent quality control issues in the new automated assembly line. Leonard took the floor for the financial impact. The financial impact has been significant, he echoed, clicking to a spreadsheet filled with negative numbers. Between lost revenue and cost overruns, We are looking at approximately $12 million in negative impact over the last 18 months. A board member shifted uncomfortably. Kira remained still, staring at the polished table. We have also received multiple complaints, Chloe resumed, displaying quotes from the anonymous reports, citing unprofessional behavior, unrealistic demands, and poor communication. This level of internal tension is unsustainable for a future executive. This is difficult for us, Leonard added, locking eyes with the board members. Kira has potential, but the overwhelming evidence suggests she is not ready for this level of responsibility. Given the financial impact and the pattern of failures, we recommend immediate termination for cause. The room quieted. They had delivered the final blow. Chloe gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Board member Jennifer Lambert broke the silence. Miss Vance, do you have a response to any of this? Kira looked up. Her voice was faint but steady. The budget delays, specifically on Apex. They were not my responsibility. I submitted the full request 8 weeks ahead of the deadline. They sat in finance for 6 weeks without approval. Because they required additional documentation, Leonard smoothly countered, which was incomplete when first submitted. That is not true, Kira retorted, her voice rising slightly. I provided every single piece of documentation you requested. The record shows otherwise, Leonard said, his tone dismissive. Kira opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have the original timestamps and documents available. Leonard had seen to that. She looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in her eyes. I kept my face neutral and kept taking notes. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Maybe you're right, she whispered. Maybe I'm not ready for this level. She had given up. Howard Pierce cleared his throat. Given these concerns and the direct testimony, termination appears to be the prudent path forward. Several board members nodded in assent. Leonard and Chloe exchanged a quick, victorious glance. They thought they had one. I set down my pen. The small sound was shockingly loud in the silence. That was a thorough presentation, I said, looking at my children. You clearly put a great deal of work into it. We felt the board needed complete information, Mother, Chloe said, sitting back down, triumphant. Absolutely. I pulled the thick leather folder closer to me. May I share some observations before we proceed to a vote? Kindly subscribe and walk with me as I reveal more stories of revenge, resilience, and the hard-earned strength that comes with age.